Welcome back, everybody. Just got this package in the mail from the mulberries. He sent me a Marumi cutting as well as a native red mulberry, and I'm going to put the Marumi cuttings onto this Taitri. This is the Taitri that's in my greenhouse, as you can see. And I got this cool camera holder, which is strapped to my neck. It's holding my phone right now. It's the first time I'm using this, so I apologize if there's shaky video or any technical difficulties. So we have three stems here, and I'm thinking of putting the Marumi in the front or maybe in the back, since Marumi is pretty cold hardy. I'm sure it'll do okay on this back pane if there's any air leakage. Because I did want to graft a citramon onto this Taitri as well. And we'll see. I really do want the Marumi, so I might actually end up just grafting both of those stems. And I'll leave that last stem there for the citramon that I wanted to try growing in here. But yeah, here we go. I'm going to take this out of the bag. So I see the native mulberry already popping out here. Let's unwrap it. Oh, nice. Wow, that's a lot. Thank you. So I have some rooted cuttings of what I believe is either a white mulberry or I doubt it's the native mulberry because the white one is more invasive and it hybridizes. And this is the Marumi. Wow, these look great. They're really fresh. Lots of buds on here. Well, let me give it a think of where I'm going to stick these. Possibly up here. Okay, so I'm going to, just to make it easier for myself, I'm going to wrap them with this. This is a 1-inch parafilm tape. I'm going to split it down the center into 1/2-inch pieces. It's easier to work with when you have smaller scions. So this is a brand new box cutter, super sharp. You want to have sharp tools when you're doing some grafting. All right, so we got 2 pieces now, and I'm going to start wrapping these. I like to wrap my scions before I graft them, just so I don't have to mess with them too much once I've put them in their positions. So I really only have to wrap where I did the graft. Slowly pull. Don't crush the buds. Gotta be gentle. Just make sure there's no air gaps. Just press down on the tape. It's made with wax, so the wax activates when it's stretched. And it sticks to itself. So if you're not stretching it enough, it's not going to stick. And sometimes when it's cold, like this tape was in storage, it tears a lot when you're wrapping it. When you're stretching it, it tends to tear. That's okay, you can just go over it again. So I apologize with the footage here just showing my wrist. I kind of forgot that the camera on my phone is on the left side of the phone. It's not in the middle. And the mount is, in the middle of my body. So it's going to be a little bit off center from here on out. And I do apologize, but I think I realized later on that the camera footage is off and I kind of adjust it. But I'll do my best to explain what kind of grafts I'm doing and how to do them, despite not being in the frame fully. So here I'm thinking of chopping these 2 Taitri branches. I don't want to go too high. I'd rather have the plant lower just because of the height inside this greenhouse. It's only 6.5 feet. I think this spot here is good, so I'm going to cut some of the thorns off just so I don't poke my hand while I'm working and wrapping things. These thorns are pretty sharp, and they will cut you if they stick you. I'm going to drop them here. I'll pick them up later when I clean up in here. So what I'm going to do with these stems that I'm going to cut, I will be rooting them in some of the sphagnum moss. So I'll make a separate video on how to root those cuttings. Some people had asked me to show how I do that, so I'll do that for you in the next video. As well as I'll be rooting those mulberry cuttings, and I'm gonna graft some of them to the rooted mulberry that I found at a warehouse. I think I told you guys about in a previous video. So I think I'm gonna cut it right here. It's sufficient height. I like the height here. Okay, so this, I'm gonna just put it down out of the way so I don't potentially step on a thorn. They will go through your shoe. Ask me how I know. And roll up the sleeves because they're getting in the way. Same with this branch here. For now, I'm just crossing it to get it out of the way. There's a thorn back here that I missed, so let me cut that off. Down here, this one too might get in the way. I pretty much cut all the thorns off of this stem. It doesn't hurt the plant. All right, so up here, I'm just checking if there's any more thorns that'll get in the way. I think up here, we're gonna do a bark graft. So what I'm gonna do is find the flat edge on this stick. And the flat edge is gonna go into the bark. The more triangular edge of the stick, that's gonna be facing me. Yeah, I apologize that I'm just showing you my wrists. But yeah, here is, I'm gonna select like 2 buds on the stick and keep some of this lower part of the cutting. So I think there's 2 buds here, and I'm gonna cut slightly above it. Because it is small, the clipper has the tendency to crush it. So now that there's an exposed area, I'm just gonna wrap the tip of it with a little bit of the parafilm. Just so it doesn't dry out. And that's what I'm doing here off camera. And I'll show it to you now. See? Okay, so we're going to take your box cutter and we're going to split just a straight line down the bark here, about the same length as the stick. Well, the exposed part of the stick, I should say. And I had to go back inside the house to get this. This is a bark separator. I had just trimmed my nails, so I don't have any nails to do this. Didn't show it, but I slipped because my grafting knife isn't sharp anymore. I need to sharpen it. Yeah, it's pretty dull. So I did slip. It doesn't matter because the other part of the, the other part was uncut. So I went ahead and just finished the job with the box cutter straight down, and I'll show it in a second. So you want to go slowly, try not to slip like I did, and just go straight down. Patience is key here. Here I'm using the bark separator on the edge of the grafting knife. All right, so here I adjusted my camera a little bit. And where you cut, you're gonna slowly slide the bark separator on your knife or your fingernail. Here, I slipped again. That's okay, I didn't damage it. Using the tiny bit of nail that I have, and it didn't work, so I'm using the bark separator again. And be gentle because you might tear the bark off, and that's not good. So it's slipping pretty easily, which is a good sign. The Taitri is actually actively growing now because it's pretty warm in here. And we're going to go ahead and cut the flat side. You want to be careful of your angle. You might cut too much, so just be careful, yeah. You can go slow. So I'm exposing as much cambium as I can. Did this a couple times. Looks good. And on the back, you want to expose a little bit more. And a tiny bit on the side. I do this as well with good results. So you've got several places where the cambium will touch the rootstock. that's how grafting works. You pair up cambium with cambium, and with pressure, they start to grow together. So here it slipped very easily. Fortunately, out of frame again. Apologize for that. Okay, so just making sure everything is inside the bark. Sometimes the bark will slip under, and you don't want that. You want it to be on top of the scion. And I'm going to use rubber bands. I like to use rubber bands for extra pressure. Sometimes the parafilm tends to expand or break down in the heat faster than the cambium can grow. I've seen that happen. And then, unfortunately, water will get in, and it will either rot out the cambium or it'll dry out because the parafilm is torn open. So with extra pressure with the rubber band, it should help at least keep the cambium pressed down. So here I'm wrapping it with parafilm. As you can see, it tore a little bit. That's okay, you just go right back over it. And as you're wrapping, you want to make sure that the sign isn't moving out of place too much. And at the top, there's going to be a little bit of an air gap, and I'll show that to you later. But we're going to make a little cover for it using the parafilm so it doesn't dry out. So I'm pretty happy with the initial wrap. And then I'm going to place a kind of like a little teepee or a tent over the exposed area at the top. And I'll show that in a second. So I did 2 wraps here. One would have been enough, but yeah, just in case, I'm going to go over it with a rubber band. And for the rubber band, it's pretty much the same. You're going to pull on it and wrap it around, making sure it's tight as you're doing it. And once you get to the end, you can tie it to the bottom end. So the initial wrap here, you want to get the end above the first round of wrapping. I don't know if that makes sense, but you'll see what I'm doing here. And just go around. Then I came back down and then I'm tying it here. It's pretty good. And that little exposed bit, I'm going to show you how I'm going to cover that with this little piece of parafilm tape. So start off in the back and just go to the front and come down a little bit. And that will prevent any of the moisture from escaping at the cut end here. And with the excess, I'm just going over the rubber band one more time. Not necessary to go all the way around. And that's it. It's sealed, so no moisture is going to escape from this cut end. There you have it. That's the first bark graft. Hopefully you got an idea of how to do this, even though it wasn't all in frame. With the remaining buds from this first stick, I'm going to do a T-bud. So I'm going to cut a bud off of the sign. I'm going to stick it into the bark. And for the remaining bit, I think it's called a veneer graft or a side graft. Some grafts have different names. They're described differently, so I'm not totally sure what the last graft is going to be called, but you can always Google it. And since I really want this variety, I think I'm just going to dedicate this entire second branch. That's what I said earlier. But for this graft, I'm going to do a cleft graft. So somewhere along this stem here in the front, I'm going to split it down the middle and cut the scion into a V shape, and then stick it into the stem and wrap it. And I'll show that to you in a bit. But here I'm trying to see where I'll do the T-bud. T-bud grafts is pretty simple. So I'm looking just for a single bud here. And I'm gonna see, I think this is a good spot for it. Yep. So it's pretty straight here, so it should be an easy cut. T-bud grafts are nice when you have a lot of buds on your stick because you can do several and have a higher chance of success. But I've noticed in our climate here, the timing really matters because they'll heal and then you need to force them to grow. And I've had buds not grow out for an entire year. They overwintered. I have a Morton on the Taitri that took a year to grow out, and I have a Prague Chimera on my Pansaris Plus bud that hasn't grown in 2 years. But yeah, here's a T-bud. You want to go straight down the bark, and then at the very top where you did your initial cut, you're just going to do a horizontal cut. So in the shape of a T, right? T-bud. And you're going to separate the bark again. Little flap on the left and then flap on the right. And go down a little bit. With the bud, you can actually finish separating the bark, so it's not necessary to do a completely loose flap here on either side. And it was really simple to open the bark here lower on the stem that it wasn't above it because I feel like there's more sap flow or something going on down here. I don't know, it was just easier than the bark graft I did above. You can see here I'm gently opening the bark. And now I'm going to take my zoom function here and just show you. You can pause it if you want to take a closer look at it. And now I got my bud. So for this, I'll have to remove the parafilm. That's okay. Just remember which direction the bud is growing. And then you're going to want to angle it to where you can cut it toward your body gently. Rock the knife if you have to. Don't cut your finger. I think people recommend cutting away from your body. To be more precise, I'm just cutting toward my body. If you're clumsy like I am, there's a risk of cutting yourself. Just be careful. Just slowly. This is why you need a very sharp knife or a box cutter. Works great. Because if you slip or change the angle, you're going to cut through the bud and it'll be ruined. So here I'm just slowly rocking it. The very tip here, I accidentally slipped what I was talking about, but it didn't damage the bud. It just has a little bit of extra bark, which I'm chopping off. And I'm holding the bud on the outside. Try not to touch the exposed cambium in case you transfer fungus and bacteria from your hands onto the bud. I'll score the bottom of it a little bit too. Yeah, my clipper there looks gross, but it was clean. Okay, so there's your bud, and you're gonna go to the T part of the flap, the horizontal cut, and you're gonna start to slide it in from the bottom end where we scored it, and then I cut it with the clipper. And once it's in far enough, I have a little bit of excess where the horizontal cut is, so I'm gonna trim it off with my box cutter just to make sure the bud is all the way in under the flaps here. And that little piece there, just flicked it off. Okay, so that is a T-bud, and I'm going to wrap it in the same way. I think I'm also going to use a rubber band. And when you're wrapping here with your parafilm, you start at the bottom, making sure that the bud doesn't slip out of underneath the bark, because then it won't heal properly. So you want to think of it in terms of pressing it down into the other cambium. making sure there's no gaps right underneath. So if you have gaps, it's not going to heal, or fungus and bacteria might grow in the space and then the bud will rot. If this were outside, water could get in as well. You don't want water to get into your graft. So now that I'm confident the bottom is secure, I'm going to wrap it again. Don't go over the bud more than twice because it might not be able to break through the parafilm. So I got to cut some more again. I used to buy the 1/2 inch size, but I found that the 1 inch size is good for bigger grafts. And you can always split it down the middle like I do if you need a smaller size. So here I'm going above the graft where the horizontal cut is, and just making sure. And that's, I believe, the second time I went around the bud, which is okay. Just make sure the bud will be able to break out eventually. Okay. And here, I did notice that I went over the bud a little too hard and the parafilm tore, so I'm just putting a tiny little bit and just tying the back of the parafilm with my finger. Twisting it. And then it just stuck to the back. I think it should be able to break out of this. It doesn't look like it's covering it too much. The final graft here is called a veneer or side graft. We're gonna do the same thing, cut the bark open and slide it in and make sure both sides are covering the scion. But this type of graft has more than one bud. Unfortunately, one of these buds has to be sacrificed. I could have probably done another T-bud, but these next buds are pretty close together and much smaller, which is going to be harder for me. So it's okay. We're going to just cut the bottom end of the little piece of scion here, and we're going to slip it into the bark, and I'll show you how I'm going to press it down. I've done this type of graft before on my Morton. I have a blood lime, and that was a veneer graft. So this is not an exact veneer graft / side graft because I'm not creating like a tongue for it to fit into. I'm just going to use the bark, kind of like a T-bud and bark graft combined together, since I'm using more than one bud, and they're going to be sticking above the cut, not inside of the flaps. I don't know, you'll see what I mean. A different day, I was cleaning up my trees outside, and I was stuck by thorns, and it just happened again. So press that thorn out of the way. So when you put your veneer graft, you can just slip it on one side of the bark, depending on how the scion is fitting. If not, you can try and get contact on both sides. And that's what I'm going to end up doing that. So here's the little bud that's going to be sacrificed. And I'm going to try to expose as much of the cambium as I can. So here you want to go slowly. I'm pulling some of the parafilm back. And here goes cutting off the bud, sacrificial bud. So the flattest part of this is going to be slipped into the T-cut that we did. Just getting it as flat as possible. That looks pretty good on my end. And then on the back, we're going to expose a little more cambium. So those bark flaps will be touching this part of the scion, and the other cut will be touching the stem, right? The inside part of the stem. And just a tiny bit off the side. So we have 3 spots where potentially the callus will grow and form a good connection to our rootstock. And here you can see with little effort, I'm sliding it right in. Sorry that this part is cut off, but yeah, I just pushed it in a little bit more. And now we're gonna wrap it again with our parafilm. So there's 2 buds sticking out of this veneer graft. And we want to cover anything exposed so that air and moisture won't get in here because we're inside of a greenhouse. But if you were to do this outside, same idea. You don't want water to get in and potentially rot out your graft. So that little exposed bit, it's good. It's gone now. This feels pretty tight, but I'm still going to wrap it with a rubber band. And with my fingers, I'm carefully pushing the parafilm just to make sure any gaps are closed and it sticks to itself. Yeah, so we got 2 buds there, and it's sufficiently tight inside the flaps here. But yeah, don't come after me if that's not an actual veneer graft. So we got a T-bud here, and on the top we have a bark graft. Okay, so with the last stick here, I like how straight the stem is, so I am gonna go ahead and do a cleft graft on this remaining Taitri stem. And I think up here is a good spot for it. It's pretty straight. I'll cut this into a V, and then I'll slide it in here, making sure everything is aligned, and I'll use the rubber bands and the parafilm again to get a really tight connection. What I should have mentioned, and I didn't mention it for the bark graft, if you can, you should leave a bud where you're grafting just to ensure that the rootstock doesn't die back before the callus can form, which I've seen happen. I'm not sure if it's a sign that the grafting failed or if the rootstock just dies back to the next bud lower on the stem, regardless of what's going on, on above it. But, just for insurance purposes, I'm going to leave a bud here and get this stem out of the way. And yeah, there's a thorn here. I'm going to cut that off. Add it to my pile of ouchies. And yeah, here's the bud where my fingers. Now we're going to slide that cleft graft through the top. I'm going to cut some of the buds off. We don't need that many. This will ensure also that they don't dry out because of how long this scion is. So I think I counted 2 or 3 here. And unfortunately, I crushed the stems here with my clipper. That's okay. We will cut it off here. That's why I mentioned you should go a little bit above the bud, just so you don't potentially crush it. And I'm going to cover the exposed bit with some of the parafilm. Okay, so just wrapping a little bit off the camera here. That's it. That's all you have to do. Make sure it's closed so your stick doesn't dry out through evaporation. And we're going to go back to the Taitri branch. And we're going to slowly rock the box cutter right down the middle. It has a tendency to split on its own. This is why you want to go slowly. Because if it gets ahead of you, it might split off the center and then, it'll break off. So you don't want that to happen. I'm pressing the stem with my fingers and then I'm slowly rocking the box cutter straight down. You want to go not too far down, but I'm just going to go as far down as the box cutter, the width of the box cutter. So I'm happy with that cut. It's pretty straight, pretty clean. And here we're taking the Marumi cutting, and we're gonna do like a V-shape cut. So both sides, we're gonna cut it. That's the first cut. This I'm cutting away from my body, just so I can get more of a V shape. I feel like it's easier if you're cutting away from your body. There's a tiny bud at the bottom here that we're gonna lose. That's okay. There's enough wood in here where it's pretty firm, so there's not much of a risk of me crushing it with the pressure. So just carving it essentially at this point, and want to make sure it's a V, good angle, and that I'm happy with that. Slightly out of focus, but you can see that there's a good angle on here. And what I end up doing here, I think it's going to be off center. This side that I stuck in, I was not happy with the contact. It was too bumpy. And I felt like even with the pressure of the rubber bands and the parafilm, we weren't going to get good contact. So it's okay if you pull it out and then just flip it, which is what I did. The other side was much better. I think here's where I flip it off camera, unfortunately. Yeah, so I was much happier with the contact on this side of the scion and the rootstock. So you want to leave a tiny little bit of the cut ends exposed on the scion so it'll callus over. At the top here, it'll be wrapped, but yeah, you do want that little bit of exposed cambium. And here I'm starting the wrap again from the bottom up, and I'm making sure that as I'm wrapping, the scion doesn't slip out or too far back into the scion, into the rootstock, rather. Because if that happens, your cambium is misaligned and it's not going to heal. But as long as you have at least one point touching, the callus will begin to grow. But yeah, the more points of contact that you have, the better outcome for grafting. Yeah, I'm pretty confident all of these grafts are done well. So it's only a matter now of the timing. I've never grafted this early, and I've never grafted inside of a greenhouse. So yeah, here I'm just making sure everything is aligned, and there's a little gap here, which I'm gonna cover in a tent like I did with the bark graft. I don't need a little piece here. But I was just saying, yeah, so it's only a matter of timing at this point with anything here healing. The Taitri is actively growing, and the scion's really fresh. So if I don't get any takes, unfortunately, it's just a timing issue, and I'll have to try again. Our daily temps are warm enough, but I'm concerned that the overnight temps might be dropping too much. It's not going to freeze from here on out, fingers crossed, and I do have the heater, but I'm not sure what'll happen if the temperature dips too far down. I know sometimes condensation builds under the parafilm when there's big temperature swings, so that might be the only issue I have to watch out for. I mean, there's not much I can do. But yeah, long term, I'm not sure that Taitri is a good rootstock for kumquats. There's no documentation on it. I know that sour oranges aren't compatible with kumquats. Taitri is part sour orange, but it's also part trifoliate, so maybe the trifoliate part of it will help the graft not be rejected. But as long as I get some growth here, I'll have material. Incompatibility doesn't show up that quickly. I had a Meiwa kumquat grafted to Citramello, and it took 3 years for that to die. And it did give me fruit. So, I mean, like I said, it'll take a while before anything shows up. And by then, I'm sure I'll have some other rootstock, possibly trifoliate, to graft onto it. But yeah, here I'm just using another rubber band just to make sure this is super tight. So if we got a failure, at least I know it won't be because of the pressure. All right. I think that's good here, and I'm going to tie it. Sometimes my big sausage fingers get in the way. There we go. So there we have it. This is a cleft graft. If it's not a cleft graft, please correct me in the comments. Just want to make sure I'm calling these things the correct name. So one more time, the bark graft, cleft graft, a T-bud, and side graft, or veneer graft, or modified T-bud graft, because it's not exactly a veneer graft, as I mentioned. I'm going to go over this with a rubber band, just to make sure the bottom of the cut is as tight as possible against the Taitri, which will ensure that we get a take, right? The T-bud, I'm not going to wrap because I think I used enough of the parafilm on there. And we'll see what happens with that one, since I'm not going to wrap it with a rubber band. We'll see if it changes anything. Sort of a control. And I do have a couple more buds left from that stick that I used for the cleft graft. So we'll just slap those on that other stem. So thinking about in terms of the future, Marumi is a very hardy kumquat, and the fruit is pretty good. And a good thing about the Marumi is that it does create hybrids. So if we pollinate it, some of the seeds will be hybrids. And I'm thinking of pollinating the Marumi with Ponsyrus Plus, as well as Taitri. Taitri is pretty hardy here in Zone 7. So what I'd like to create is some kind of usable, edible, early kumquat for us northern growers, with the goal of having a completely outdoor tree, right? We don't want to heat our trees during the winter. At least I don't. But here we go. There's the, I'm going to call this a T-bud graft as well, because I slipped the entire bud, or 2 buds here inside the bark. So wish me luck that one of these grafts takes, and we'll be growing Marumi in here. Thanks again to the mulberries for sending this over, as well as the native mulberry, which I'll be rooting and grafting to the cuttings I found. See ya in the next one. Bye.